Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this display flying workshop brought to you this evening by Astral Aviation Consulting on behalf of the UK Civil Aviation Authority. Many of you know, I've met many of you before. My name's Matt Lane. I'm a head of training and an active single and multi-engine flight instructor and examiner. And I'm joined by two esteemed colleagues. Many of you have met Nigel before. Hello, Nigel. Let you introduce yourself as ever.
As you know, I'm Nigel. Most of you probably know by now. I'm head of training for a flight organisation, two actually, flight instructor, flight examiner, display pilot as well, hence this this evening and why I'm here. And I also run Easy PPL Ground School. As you know, we provide courses for theoretical training for student pilots, licensed pilots, and all sorts of other people too.
Great to have you with us again, Nigel. Thank you. And I'm delighted, new face this evening, Phil Bird. Phil, I'll leave you to say over to say yourself. Say hi to everyone, Phil.
Hi, very good evening, everyone. My name's Phil. Been flying for about 25 years or so. Initially in the Air Force for 16 or 17 years, flying the Tornado F3, instructor and display pilot on the Hawk, where I got my first bit of display flying, and then most of my time in the Air Force flying the Typhoon. Left the Air Force a few years ago, flown a lot of civilian airliners, so the A320, 330, 350, 747, and a few others. Currently at Virgin Atlantic, flying the 330 and 350, and in my spare time, displaying the JP Jet Provost Mark V in this year's display season. So I'm delighted to be here and to talk to you and answer your questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Phil. It's great to have you with us. And I could see lots of people in the chat saying hello from all over the country again, as ever, which is brilliant to see you all with us, especially on what is a kind of warm June evening as tonight. If you want to stay in the loop with events and resources, please sign up to our mailing list. And you can do this by going to our website, www.astralaviationconsulting.com. And there's been a link just appeared in the chat box, which you can put from there. Over the next course of the hour workshop, we're going to break down into some easily digestible chunks, and we're going to cover display flying and take some of those lessons from display flying and how they potentially apply down to GA flying as well. We're going to take questions as we go through. Please use the Q&A box. I will try and keep an eye on questions, especially when Phil and Nigel are speaking, and we'll try and pick them up at the relevant thing, or we'll pick them up at the end in a Q&A wrap up if that works best as well. But I'll try and keep an eye on some. Please try and use the Q&A box and then we can manage them. But if there's good, interesting comments coming in the chat, I will also have a look at those. Now, many of you will know we always start with a poll, and this just gives those of you that are not familiar chance to try out the poll functionality. Also gives us an idea about who's actually with us tonight. So let us know what type people mainly fly. Just as a reminder, if you're watching this on the YouTube playback, you won't be able to interact with the polls, but you'll see the results and we'll talk through the results. So this is what do people mainly fly? Well aware that many of you may fly lots of different types, but what do you mainly fly? Let's have a look at the results, see who we've got with you. So a lot of single engine piston people, great. Microlights, and some MEP and helicopter people. None of our gyro colleagues tonight. Perhaps they don't display gyros, I don't know. And no TMGs. There you go, Nigel. You told me I had to put TMGs in, and no TMG pilots have joined us. It's typical, isn't it? So there we go. Perhaps they put themselves as gliders. Anyway, firstly, I'm going to play a little video. It's just a few minutes long, but it just gives you a feel for what we're talking about. This, Nigel, this is you, I believe, isn't it?
Yep, this is me.
And we're going to play it, and Nigel will just point out a little bit of what's happening. And this is just an example of the kind of displays that we're going to be drawing on and talking about at the slightly slower end, if I may say that, I think, Nigel. So here we go. Here's the video playing.
Okay, so yeah, this little video is just an extract from a display I did a few years ago at East Kirkby, for those people that know East Kirkby. This aeroplane's a Yak 52. built by the Russians, so to speak. And as I said, this is about halfway through the display. And the cameraman actually isn't in the crowd. He's just on one side of the crowd and almost on the display line. So Yak 52, pretty agile, as you can see, inverted systems on it, very capable of flying upside down for a short time. And fortunately, so's the pilot, only for short times though. And lots of things going on while we're doing all those things, invert passes and everything else. So you don't sort of get your license and step into a 52 and do this thing straight away. That's one of the things we'll cover a bit later on about how you can get into this sort of flying if that's what you would like to do. Currently, I've got about $8,000 and they are all on GA aircraft and a vast majority on tailwheel. This isn't a tailwheel, this is a tricycle undercarriage. Interesting, you can see that when the wheels retract on the 52, they don't go all the way up. They just sit protruding underneath the aircraft here. Stall turn coming up here, 90-degree turn or roll just to get the logo in front of the crowd, for want of a better word, because we get sponsored, or I had sponsorship at the time on the aircraft. Very manoeuvrable, as we said. It was built originally for doing competition aerobatics. I'm going to mention a little bit about competition aerobatics as part of this this evening as well. Very, very manoeuvrable aeroplane. In fact, of all the aircraft I've flown, this is still my favorite aeroplane. It is really, really good fun to fly, but it can also get you into a bit of trouble if you're not too careful. We're just about coming to the end here. So this last maneuver, I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'll brief you a bit about it afterwards. But we're just going for height here, coming around, and it's crowd left to right. And this is the interesting maneuver, shall we say, which I often talk through while I'm doing it at the display over the RT in a conversation with the commentator. So just going to let you watch this little bit coming up. So here we go, building a bit of speed and into it. So for those of you that want to know, that was called a lonchevac, and what it actually means in Russian is the actions of a drunk man. So you can sort of see why that is. So that's a bit about the 52, a little bit of an intro to display flying, and we'll cover that off as we go through this evening.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nigel, as ever. We will come back to that. That gives you an idea of the kind of flying that we're going to talk about, and Nigel is going to talk about some of the differences and some of the regulations around display flying, just to give you a bit of interest. And then, like I say, we're going to start bringing some of the lessons down into GA. Over to you, Nigel.
So we sort of mentioned competition aerobatics there because I mentioned the 52 was actually built for competition aerobatics. So let's have a quick discussion very briefly about what the difference is. There is a huge difference between competition aerobatics and display flying. I don't do competitions. That's not my cup of tea. Competition aeros, it is about pilot skill. You're competing with each other. It is about making the aeroplane do things in a very precise way and making it look good to the judges, which are, judging you. And so it requires, or you're anticipating trying to do perfect maneuvers. Compare that to display flying, where you are not showing a pilot's skill. You're trying to show the capability of the aircraft. You're trying to entertain the audience without scaring them witless. And generally it's less stressful on the pilot, on the display pilot, and less stressful on the aeroplane, because as you'll see later on, we fly within a certain set of limits that we decide to do. So just before we get cracking then, let's have a little question to do with display flying. So let's have a bit of a poll here. So imagine you hold a PPL or a LAPL or some other licensed, some other license that allows you to fly an aircraft, and there's no additional ratings or authorizations. You've been asked by your local village fate. They only tend to have 50 to 100 people. Well, can you just do a couple of fly pass in your aeroplane? So what's the correct answer here? Is it yes, you can do so, providing you adhere to the low flying prohibitions, the low flying rules? Yes, you can do so, providing you don't get paid or rewarded for it. Again, providing you adhere to the low flying rules. You can do it, providing you can, and you can charge for the cost of the aeroplane only. Again, low flying rules comes into it again. Or is it D, you just can't do this at all? So what do you reckon then? A, B, C, or D? Put your answers in now. And let's have a look at the results, shall we? Okay, so a fair number of you have gone for the fact you can do it so long as you abide by the rules and you don't get paid. In fact, the answer is you can't do it at all. Okay, and we're going to come on to why that is in a second and which regulation that applies to. So in the meantime, let's sort of step on to the regulations themselves then to do with air displays. So display flying is really highly regulated from both the organizational point of view, as in, organizing an air display, and also from a pilot's qualifications and competences as well. So first of all, let's start out right and saying, if you're a bit of a maverick and just want to show off, then you're not going to last very long on the display circuit. Simple as that, for all of the reasons I've said before. And actually, there's a lot of human factors stuff that will come across in display flying, and personality and your traits as a person and why you want to do this sort of thing comes into the fore in all respects as part of the evaluation of you as a pilot. We'll talk about individually about these two documents in a second, but if you are displaying, then and you have a CPL, yes, you can get paid. You can display on a PPL, but you can't make any money out of it. You can only recoup the costs, and that's where some of you have probably got your answer from. But the actual question is you also have to have the qualification to do a display in the meantime. Lots of people think, oh yeah, I'll go and do a display, and I'll display my Cessna 152 as a starting point. To be fair, you're not going to get to do any displays, because even those people who have quite an interesting aircraft will find that display organisers, they're quite canny people, and they're always after a good bargain. Okay, so they're very canny about the costs and stuff like that. So probably for most displays, the best you'll ever achieve is to recoup the cost, even if you've got a CPL anyway. So regulations, we'll talk about those two docs in a moment, but let's have a quick look about the A&O, which is the next one, which defines the definition of an air display. And this is where this question that came from originally. So a flying display means any flying activity deliberately performed for the purpose of providing an exhibition or entertainment at an advertised event open to the public. And if that is the case, like it was in the question, then you have to have permission from the CAA. It's called an Article 86 permission, and the pilot concerned has to have a display authorization, and you have to have a flying display director on the ground. And these are all authorized people from the CAA, not CAA people, but you get the authorization from the CAA to perform those roles. So individually then, those other two documents that we talked about, CAP 403 was the first one. Then what that document contains is all of the administrative requirements in order to what you need to be able to hold a display. So this is the Flying Display Director's Bible, and there is a lot of hoops that have to be gone through with risk assessments, maps, all sorts of stuff, and other considerations to do with the area and displays and houses and all sorts of other bits and pieces like that. And just in the chat box, there's a link to that document now being shown up if you want to go and have a look further. The other document that we came across was flying displays for the pilot, or the document for the pilot, which is CAP 1724. So that's the next slide on there. So this is really to do with what's involved in becoming a display pilot, how you get evaluated, what the actual display authorization evaluators how you become one of those, and the sorts of things that they have to perform and they have to do as well. So that goes from initial authorizations. Without going into too much detail, your display license, for want of another word, display authorization does not give you carte blanche to display absolutely anything, doing whatever you like. It's very curtailed. It's a bit like driving a car in that you're only allowed to drive certain things, or indeed like your license. So there are aircraft groups, aircraft categories, and that's based on horsepower mainly. And then we've got skill levels. Separating out from that is formation and aerobatic skill levels, and whether it's a flyby. And with all of those things, we get minimum heights that we're allowed to go down to on an individual pilot basis. And that's how it works. So you are given an authorization with some very specific limitations as to the aeroplane, and also your what you can do at a display with regards to maneuvers, whether you can do formation or not, and the minimum heights that you can use at that display. So how do we do it then? So assuming we've got all of those things in place, let's talk about a pre-season workup, because usually the display flying is usually in the sort of flying season, so to speak. So that's usually from about May through to October if we're lucky. So most pilots don't do much, in the winter months. So if we're doing aerobatics in particular, G tolerance can be a factor. It's a bit like going to the gym. If you go to the gym regularly, your body doesn't mind too much about lifting a few weights. But if you have a big break and you go and try and lift the weights that you ended with at the tail end of last year, your body's going to scream at you. And it's pretty much the same with G tolerance. When we're pulling G during the maneuvers, then we have to rebuild our tolerance up. And the more often you do it, the more your body gets used to it, so the easier it becomes. We also sometimes redesign our own display. We have to design a display. It's not ad hoc. You don't just pitch up and do what you like within your the remit that you've been given. Each display is planned. Even the non-aerobatic ones, each display is planned with different types of passes and stuff like that. And particularly with the lesser powered or the lower powered aircraft, we have to think about energy management as well, because we might start high and end up low. Some aircraft are capable of maintaining altitude throughout their display. Some of the underpowered ones or lesser powered ones might not. So a Chipmunk, for example, you'd start at 2,000 feet and you'd end up at your minimum height at the end of the display after about 7 or 8 minutes. For the Yak, for example, that's pretty good at maintaining its energy. So I might start the display and finish the display at my minimum, which would be 100 feet. So we pre-season workup, again, it's unusual that we wouldn't as a pilot be able actually to do a whole routine having come back off a winter break. So we would split that up and gradually add the bits together, and also we would gradually reduce our minima. So even after a break, we would still do the routine at 3,000 feet, and only once we're happy we would start to bring it down lower and lower. The more experience you have from a year's point of view, then obviously that recovery takes less and less time. So I might be happy doing a couple of practices up high, and then I'd bring it down after another couple of practices down to display height. But that's after about, what should I say, 20 years of display flying. I've got to that capability. We always try to practice in the configuration, the aircraft in the configuration that we want to display at. And I've got a really good example of that very briefly. So that Yak 52 you saw there, when I first started to display it, I decided at one stage, a couple of years in, I was going to put an abracadabra into there, which it's basically one of those launch-evacs, but instead of done vertically, it's done on a 45-degree upline, which means that the energy doesn't dissipate as quickly. And it's quite spectacular to look at. It looks like the aircraft's doing backward cartwheels in the sky. So happy to do the practice, done all of that. Everything worked out, and it looks like that launch-evac was a bit out of control at the end there. It wasn't, trust me. It looks the same every single time, and it comes out in the same place every single time, providing I put the inputs in the correct place. The abracadabra was the same. Happy with that. Everything sorted itself out. I came came down to display height, and away we go. So first display of the season, off I go, and go and perform this abracadabra, expecting everything to go tickety-boo, and all of a sudden, at about 1,500 feet, it doesn't come out where I expect it to, and it ends up in an inverted spin at 1,500 feet in the middle of a display. So fortunately, it was inverted, strange that you might say, but yaks come out of inverted spins a lot quicker than an upright spin, so I managed to get out of that. And then use the remaining height to recover from the dive. Yaks are really good at flicking on you if you try and pull too much G too soon with very little airspeed. So I made a conscious decision to use all of the height available to pull out above the ground at 50 feet. Okay, and that was a conscious decision, much to the amazement of the crowd. And the reason for that, it took me 2 days to work out what the difference was. And the reason was, on the display day, I'd put smoke oil on board the aircraft, which sits in a tank behind the second rear seat. So it had a different C of G on display day than I had when I was practiced. And I made sure everybody in the display world knew that, okay, afterwards, after I'd come across that, because it was just one of those things that, you know, you hadn't really thought about, or no one had really thought about, and it nearly caused me to come a bit of a cropper. So display practices, we don't have any exemptions from the rules of the air. Certain locations might have an exemption that allow us to practice down to our minimum heights, which is, you know, less than 500 feet away from the usual things with the low flying rules. But, you know, we have to abide by every other rule as well. While we are practicing away from a designated site that has got that. Usually it's airfield. Duxford, for example, have got a display permission, a display practice permission. It's called a long-term low-flying permission. We still have to jump through hoops to use it. We still have to, you know, tell them what we're going to do, give all our details across, and stuff like that. So it's not a free-for-all. Just a little bit about formation here, because we had a couple of questions earlier as we were preparing this about formation. Why do formations have to jump into the circuit and do running breaks and cock everybody else up in the circuit? Well, the bottom line is we shouldn't, you know, a formation lead should make sure that when they do the running break to land, which is the whole formation comes down the runway, then the aircraft formation aircraft peel off one by one in order to go downwind. So usually the formation lead will arrange, you know, a time to fit in with the circuit traffic like that. And the question we got asked was, why does that have to happen? Why can't you just split up and come in individually to fit in with the circuit traffic? And to be honest, it's easier to do a break into the circuit from a formation, because it's, you know, we all know where each other is, and we all know where the other circuit traffic is as well, rather than, you know, imagine the Reds, rather than 9 individual aeroplanes all trying to get into the circuit at the same time from all different angles. So that's the reason why formation breaks are done in that way, in order to land. But it is still, you know, courtesy from the lead point of view to try to fit in with whatever traffic there is in the circuit already. So that was just a quick thing that we were asked to explain as to you know, how that works. Next bit then, talk about currency prior to the display. You know, as I said, dependent on the engine horsepower, we are required to perform, you know, some practice displays, you know, a certain number of practice displays before we are allowed to display at a display. Formation is the same thing. Often the legal minimum, you'll find most display pilots do more than the legal minimum in order from a practice point of view. Practice emergencies, obviously we're at fairly low level doing some strange activities, so we will practice, you know, an engine failure, for example, at the top of that stall turn that I just did, or at the top of the launch back, or at the top of a loop, and we will practice getting out of those, and importantly, getting out of those away from the crowd, so we don't overfly the crowd. I mentioned a little bit about operating capabilities there. So, the way we design the routine and the way we fly the aeroplane, we are operating well within our own personal comfort zone and our capabilities, so that we have the capability to deal with those unexpected events that might crop up in a display. If we're operating at 100% capacity, just doing the display, that's no good, because we're just not going to be able to cope with anything that goes wrong and have a nice outcome from it. And again, that's really another difference maybe between competition and display flying. You might be much more saturated in a competition display, than you are in competition rather than in a display. Bit about evaluation then. So display authorization, it only lasts for a period of 13 months. We have to get tested each time. It's not just a quick flight, it's a full display routine we have to do at the appropriate level with a display authorization evaluator. And then there is also an interview and a chat, and the whole thing usually lasts at least 2.5 hours. Okay, so it's very well regulated. And obviously they will also want us to see a couple of practice maneuvers. So they will call to us somewhere in our routine, this has happened, and watch us as to how we decide what to do to get out of the problem.
And Phil, I believe, you've just recently been through this with your machine, I think, haven't you? How did you find it? What was it like for you?
The actual evaluation?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, very good process, I think. Very well thought through, and obviously a well trodden path. Mine was with a incredibly experienced display pilot who's also become somewhat of a mentor, which is great to have. We did it across the course of a day. As Nigel was leaving, then it can be done from the ground and with them observing from the ground. This was done in the aircraft. So it starts with a oral exam, so a discussion and Q&A session around the rules and regulations that Nigel was just describing, and around your display itself. There's also in the background a human factors assessment, which is done at the very beginning as you become a display pilot, and stays valid for some time. But obviously, human factors is a huge part of display flying, and the actual test itself, much like flying tests that everybody on this call will have done. The examiner came with me on the flight. We were operating at a location which didn't have a long-term permission, so adhering to the rules of the CIRA rules and regulations. So we used a 1,000-foot base height. And then performed the display in full. And halfway through the display, there was an emergency given to me by the examiner, engine failure at the top of the loop, to make sure the escape maneuver, which was going to be flown, was correct. And then a recovery to the airfield for a fairly in-depth debrief. That went well, and the DA was authorised. So fairly standard kind of test and evaluation that many people will be used to.
Brilliant, thanks. So it's great to hear a bit of an insight into it and as it went. And yeah, engine failure at top of a loop. That's obviously a favourite, Nigel. That's kind of what you alluded to there, wasn't it?
One of them.
Brilliant. That's great. So yeah.
So carrying on with the flying bit then. So paperwork. You have got to be absolutely red hot with your paperwork as a display pilot, because all the boxes have to be ticked. Everything is checked, double checked, and everything else by the flying display director as well. So there is no excuse. If there is something wrong with your paperwork, you will not display. End of story. So it's really, really important. Clear understanding of location display lines, what we call minimum separation distances, and how the planned display fits into that location. Because some display locations are quite tight, and something that's suitable for EAC 52 certainly might not be suitable for a Provost, for example, depending on the lay of the land and what else is around. So it can have an impact on what type of aircraft are able to display. you know, if I'm talking about me preparing for display, then there's aircraft preparation, fuel, maintenance, spares. You're a one-man band. You know, you're looking after your own aeroplane. You haven't got the luxury of, you know, ground crew. You know, most display pilots operate on a one-man band type thing. Occasionally, with a you know, the more complex aircraft like Phil flies, there's some help on the ground as well there too. Route planning, that's down to you. Yeah, weather. You know, we're keen not to let people down, so there is a big pressure there on get their itis, okay? And then we've got to display. So you don't want to go through a whole load of really poor weather, wondering what you're going to do and really have a lot to worry about, only to then pitch up and then have to display as well. And sometimes we display what we call onslaught. So we'll pitch, you know, we'll journey to the display location and then display either after a short hold or straight away. We don't necessarily, you know, land and have a nice break and stuff like that. So all of those things have to be taken into account. If we need to stay away, we have to sort our own accommodation out. Local knowledge, again, is quite important. Local knowledge of the local area that you're about to display in as well. Google Maps is pretty good for that. You can pre-pick the fields around the display site that you're going to choose for your forced landing. All those sorts of things you really, really have to be on top of. There is a display briefing by the flying display director, either over the phone or, you know, in a meeting at like a big displays like Duxford. There's about 300 people in a room, and you know, we gather together for about an hour and a half and talk about the display and stuff like that, and double check that all the you know, the logistics are going to hold together for the display. Slot times, preparation times, and importantly, big displays, a quiet time before you go and do your display. You know, even if it means you just go to the aeroplane and sit in it and just think about what you're about to do well before you decide to go and execute your display. We talked about unexpected issues. Equally, you can actually get told by the flying display director to terminate the display, to stop the display. You can get a too close call, a too low call, and a too high call. I'm not going to go into the details, but all of those things you're going to have to respond to and know what to do about. And then, of course, at the end of the day, you've still got to get home safely as well. So it can be quite a busy time if you're a solo display pilot as part of an organisation that, or as part of a display that is happening at some other location apart from your home base. So I'm not going to steal Phil's thunder, because I'm sure, you know, and the rest of the evening we can have a chat about some of those things and how they relate back to GA. But let's hand back over to Matt now and have a chat with Phil as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nigel. So quick question that's floating around. Difference between a terminate and a stop call. Are they actually different calls, or do they mean the same thing?
No, they are. So a terminate call is done where the flying display director needs you to actually just stop your display for the moment. It's nothing you've done wrong. It might be some external influence, like, you know, they've got an aeroplane transiting too close, or there's a lot of birds just appeared, as opposed to a stop call, and that is you will stop and you will land because the flying display director does not like something that you've done. Okay, so that is the difference between two. And a stop call also means you can't carry on and do another display the same day until, you know, the CAA have been involved and discussed what's gone wrong and sorted it all out.
Excellent. Interesting to know. So yeah, and I'm guessing as well, Phil, you know, these the frequencies that you'll be working with, these are hopefully quite closely guarded. Is that right? So if you can't get interference or anything, you want a quiet frequency, I'm guessing, when you're doing the display.
Yeah, absolutely. They are discrete frequencies allocated to the display itself, and it required quite a lot of discipline amongst the display participants as well. So, for example, if you're, as Nigel was saying, you might be arriving for a slot at, say, I don't know, 11:20, but whilst the display is taking place, you don't announce your arrival. You know, jet provost holding to the south, 3,000 feet, whatever. There's silence on that frequency until you hear the current performance is finished, and then you check in. So to a discrete frequency in the kind of strictest term of the word.
Great. That's interesting to know. Right. So starting out, and we're just going to get a little bit of background to how you sort of build into these things now as well. But we're going to do another poll just to keep everybody awake and involved. And here we go. Aerobatics use a special shorthand to document maneuvers. Anybody knows what is that shorthand called? We've got a few choices there. Aeros, Aresti, ascript, async. What do people think? I'll just give you a few seconds to choose. Let's have a look at the answers, please. Oh, brilliant. Nearly 50%. The answer is, of course, if you know it, Aresti. Oh, that's good. And it was, I don't know if Nigel or Phil know, was that named after an individual? I think it was, wasn't it? Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, the guy that invented it. It's just like a shorthand for the moves. It's diagrammatical. You know, it's not wordy. So you know, a loop is a circle, for example. Phil probably does the same. You know, for non-competition aerobatic pilots, we often, you know, write stuff on our sheet that when we're designing stuff that we can understand ourselves. Whereas competition, that has to be understood by the whole community, and hence the Aresti is a standard that is involved to describe those manoeuvres. Yeah.
Brilliant. Great. Right. So I'm going to now have a chat with Phil and just pull out some of the interesting background about how you get into this. So Phil, that's is that a picture of you in the Hawk there?
It is. That's a pre-season photo shoot flight done with myself in that aeroplane, which was the primary aeroplane for the 2012 Hawk display flight, which was the last solo Hawk display season. That aircraft is now in all red in the red arrows. That's XX278, and if you recognise the heart on the bottom of the aircraft, that's the Royal Air Force Benevolent Fund logo. And so we were doing that flight as a way of generating some images like this to help with the fundraising throughout the season.
Brilliant. So, you know, in the military, lots of Hawk pilots. You know, at your base, there would have been loads of that. How did you end up being the display pilot? Was this something you volunteered for, or did somebody tell you to do it, or how did you get into this?
Yeah, so I was. It's a competition, which I never win anything. So the year before I tried and failed, and didn't get selected. I think came second or third or something. And then the second year round, entered again. I think it was about 5 of us were shortlisted for it. And there's a kind of some hoops to go through, some media work to do and be evaluated on, and then into the flying. You're all given a set sequence at the time was given by the station commander of RAF Valley, and you go into the RAF Valley overhead over in Anglesey, and all of you with the station commander sitting in the back seat fly the sequence, and whoever does the best at flying and the media stuff on the ground gets the slot for that season. I was really lucky to get it in 2012.
Now, Nigel talked earlier about personality being a big part of this, and you know, being a big hero ego, wanting to show off yourself is not the right personality. Do you think that's the same in the military selection? Do you think they're looking for, you know, a person so much as much as the flying skills there, or?
I think so, and definitely the ego element. This, you know, the majority of activity in the workup. Of course, the military has the resource to put into this. The majority of the activity was in the debrief. We'd fly the display twice a day, so early morning and early afternoon. It would be filmed, and then the film would be debriefed with myself and the display supervisor, who was my boss at work, and you'd go through it in, you know, painstaking detail. So no real place for ego, just that kind of quiet, humble sort of reflection on, you know, every little bit which wasn't quite right and could be tweaked and made better. And yeah, I don't think these days you don't really get the people. It's got the RAF maybe has a reputation for it in people's mind's eye, but I think that those kind of egos of even at the sharpest end of the Air Force have gone, and you know, it's all about being humble and being open to learning, as it is in, you know, GA flying as well.
So if we now move on to you sort of displaying a jet provost, which is very similar aeroplane to the Hawk, really, just a slightly different era. But how did you get into displaying the civilian jet provost? Because you don't own that aeroplane, do you? But you're displaying it for somebody else, I think I'm right in saying.
That's exactly correct. So you obviously very expensive airplane, not many of them, and also you have to get, as we spoke about at the beginning, a display authorization to fly, and to display these aircraft. You've got to be a suitably experienced and qualified individual. So, in a nutshell, I got into the jet provost flying by the chap who'd done this role that we're looking at on the screen previously, doing the jet provost role. He emigrated to Australia and was kind enough to connect me with the owners of the airplane, and we went from there. Ultimately, ending up satisfying the CAA last year and getting the first civilian DA. Brilliant.
So, how does it compare? So, in the military, you've got loads of engineers. You said you've got a boss looking after you. You're allowed to fly twice a day. You've probably got a spare aeroplane. You've got all of the branding and all of that stuff. What's it like displaying the jet provost in a civilian setup compared to that?
Yeah, you have to be very, very, very careful, and because you haven't got those safety nets. You haven't, or rather you have, but you have to make sure that they're there yourself. And so you have to plan a lot more. Nigel was alluding to it, you're a one-man band, or in my case, a two-man band with a little bit of support. But to plan and build in a lot of time. Just simple things like doing the before flight on the airplane, or the turnaround servicing on the aircraft. On the jet provost, we keep it exactly the same as it was done in the RAF. Of course, that would have been done by a fully qualified RAF engineer, which I'm definitely not. And so it just takes it takes a lot of time, and you don't have the you don't have the supply chain behind you or anything like that. So on occasion you have to have honest conversations, and sometimes disappointing conversations with show organisers, because the aircraft isn't serviceable. It's those moments when you mustn't press ahead, because there is a reasonable amount of pressure or expectation, usually in your own mind. There really isn't, because the flying display directors don't want you flying unserviceable aircraft, obviously. But you sometimes have to make the difficult decisions not to fly, just because returning a jet provost to serviceability when there's just a very small group of you takes some time. So a lot more planning and a lot more time, I think, is and a lot more work. it's probably the summary.
Brilliant. So we talked a little bit about some of the military civil differences in terms of the whole operation there. How what are some of the differences in Nigel's obviously talked about the regulations and the setup. Is it all pretty similar these days, or is there some differences between how the actual displays are flown as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar. I'd say that the military regulations are, I'd say, I was going to summarise it, they're more prescriptive. So Regulatory Article 2335, RA 2335, is the equivalent to the two documents that Nigel talked us through for the military, RA 2335, and that has very, very specific limits for each kind of display, for example, so weather limits for defined full rolling and flat displays, whereas once you have a civilian display authorization, so mine the other day, or the other month rather, was flown in gin clear weather down here in the Cotswolds, and we flew a full display, the full looping maneuvers using all the aspects. We didn't touch on demonstrating a flat display, like you might see the red arrows, for example, transition to if the weather gets bad, or they start with a low cloud base. Yet with a civilian DA, once you've achieved that, in whatever weather you achieved it in, you're clear to perform not any maneuver you like, but you're clear to adjust your display as you see fit. The military's again more prescriptive, and you either fly. You have to have three specific displays which you can't alter. So a full display, a rolling display as the cloud base comes down, and a flat display and very low cloud base or lower cloud base, 1,000 feet and 5 kilometers visibility. And you can't alter them at all, and you can't transition between them unless you've got approval to do so in your public display authority. So I'd say that they're the main differences. And as a civilian display pilot, or those aspiring to do it, it's a really good idea to have a good handle on the military regulations, because you'll be at air shows with them, and it's the terminology they're using when they're talking about the weather and the decisions they might make if they're coming off display before you or starting after you, are quite good to have situational awareness on, and you get that by having a reasonable understanding of their regulations as well as our civilians.
Great, thanks, Phil. So we've covered a lot of these as we've gone through in some of the questions anyway, but what would be a couple of your top tips for getting good at the maneuvers involved? What would be your top tips?
So start off with simple ones, and into the first couple of display seasons, stick with it. That would be my big one. But yeah, practice for sure. Don't set yourself very difficult targets. The Jet Provost is capable of doing a stall turn. The Jet Provost has done tens of thousands of stall turns over the years, but that's a really complex manoeuvre. In a jet aeroplane close to the ground, it can go wrong. If you're doing it every day, fine, but I'm not. So we don't go anywhere near those kind of manoeuvres. So keep it simple. Practice. Have a mentor, absolutely, but also we were talking about this in the preparation for today, and this will definitely kind of spills over into the GA world. Listen to your have a mentor, but listen to your peers and your mates who might say to you, that just didn't look good. I had one in the Hawk taking off at Duxford, actually, of all places, and I was settled well into the season. It was about August, September time. I'd done approaching 100 displays, I think, that already very, very comfortable. And a mate of mine who happened to be there with a different airplane just mentioned to me, he said, "Phil, you put the gear up very, very early." And I didn't think I had at all. I thought, thanks. But as you said it, I sort of disregarded it. I thought, that's just normally what I do, until I watched the video. And he was absolutely right. I'd taken to raising the gear just fractionally off the ground, which was a really silly thing to do, and something I just fell into, but was picked up by a friend. So have a mentor, but listen to your peers and your mates. Debrief, absolutely, just like everybody does. I hope in the GA world that we're all in. There's no place for egos. Egos in air displays don't last long. You're either removed by the airshow, organisational, the airshow organisation, the display, the flying display directors, or you scare yourself. So there's no place for an ego. And in terms of lowering the base height, Nigel's kind of touched on this. You only do it very gradually, and with hopefully with somebody watching you and giving you advice and whatnot. But you just do that very gradually, and there's no need to fly. Both Nigel and I think do fly our minimums, but you don't have to. And with bad weather or for whatever reason, you might want to raise that during a display or plan to do a display at a slightly higher height, and that's absolutely fine as well. The base height doesn't have to be a target all the time.
Brilliant. No, thanks, Phil. Some good top tips there. Right, so we're now going to wrap up. We've got 10 minutes left, well, just as we just wrap up, and we're going to look at pulling some of these things that we've talked about and make some suggestions how we think it could apply to maybe people just not doing display flying, but flying GA, and whether there's some good stuff and some good lessons we can draw down. We're going to have a final poll, though, another question. Can you perform aerobatics while solo, i.e. without any passengers, without having an aerobatic rating on your license? What do we think? Yes, no, sometimes, or it depends. So I know loads of you will probably email in and comment, Matt, sometimes and it depends are pretty similar. Yes, we know. But so remember, we don't take any answers. We don't know who's answered what or anything on this. So just what do you think? And we'll have a look at the answers now, please. So no, sometimes, or it depends. Quite a split there. The actual answer is it depends. Why does it depend, Nigel? Come on, tell us.
Okay, so it depends. If you're operating on a Part FCL license, which, let's face it, most of everybody is these days, then you cannot do aerobatics at all unless you have got an aerobatic rating on your license. Okay, if you're operating on one of the old CAA licenses originally, pre-JAR, pre-EASA, then strangely you don't have to have an aerobatics rating before you can go and do aerobatics. Now, you're a bit stupid if you do, to be fair, because you need definitely to do some training. But that's the answer to the legal answer to the question, shall we say? Yes, you really do need to have some aerobatic training, full stop. And if you're on Part FCL, you actually must have the aerobatic rating on there before you do aerobatics.
Thank you. And I've had a number of visits to the Air Accident Investigation branch where we've seen the sad outcome of people doing aerobatics without any training. So I'm not going to go into the details, but I think we can all know what recommended is very much the right way ahead. So we're going to just pull out, like I say, in the last 10 minutes, some of these lessons we're going to draw down now. I'm going to ask Nigel and Phil to comment on these. So planning ahead, we've talked lots and lots about planning there as well. So Nigel, what have you learned from planning the displays, all of that good stuff you talked about? What do you think a GA pilot really could take away from that, as we've got on the screen there?
The key thing I'd say is attention to detail. You have got to you've got to have attention to detail. I mentioned about the paperwork to start with, that's attention to detail too. But your own planning needs to be attention to detail. Think about, in particular, the diversions. It's no use planning a diversion to an airfield 5 miles away if the whole area is covered in cloud. So you've got to have a think about what you're trying to achieve here. And certainly, think about the what ifs. Try to think about all of the things that could possibly go wrong, so that you've already thought about them before they happen in the air, and then you're wondering what you're going to do about it. So it really is quite important to spend time. That's the important thing. You need to have time to sit down and plan carefully. That's the key thing.
And Phil, do you use Google Earth and that to look at the site and the airfields where you're going? Nigel mentioned Google Earth. We've seen some of the maps there. Is that tools or views or something else?
Absolutely, and I agree with everything Nigel said. Yeah, absolutely. Google Earth, any kind of photographic imagery that's been generated by the air show itself and sent out in the pilot's notes. Going to go through that in real detail. And also, I did tour Bay Air Show the other day, which I hadn't done before. Sits in a kind of tight C-shaped cove with the display taking place in the northern end of that. Quite not unusual, but quite niche and quite unique to itself. So talking to people that have done it before, getting the tips and making sure that that's in part of your planning process, I think is important.
And I think this is what we could take across the GA. So if you're going to a new airfield, you can use these techniques as well. You can look for geographical features. You can look for threats in terms of engine failure on departure options. You can look at Google Earth and pick up geographical points and that to help you maybe maintain airspace and things like that. I know I've been doing a test at Oxford today as well. The Briars control zone is right up alongside the Oxford ATZ, and one of the key learning points is there's a nice railway line, and you know that you must turn in the circuit on departure before that railway line as well, and you can quite easily pick that up and see that on Google Earth or certain on SkyDemon other apps are available. You can click from your SkyDemon, from your charting, to go over to satellite mapping, and it's well worth having a look at that in the circuit there as well. So yeah, definitely. So we talked loads and loads about practicing, and it's a real common theme that comes through. So Nigel, is this really relevant to GA pilots? I mean, GA pilot, flying from A to B, it's all fairly simple, really. They practice that on every flight, really. So what does a GA pilot need to practice?
I mean, yeah, we all might, as GA pilots, think, okay, it's just another navigation, okay, but you can practice and see how accurate you can be. But I think more importantly, when we talk about practice, we're talking about, increasing your situational awareness. The better you get, or the more you do something, the better you get at it. But also, you'll find the more spare capacity you end up to deal with other problems as well. So practice gives you the chance to sort of cater for that. But it can't go too far. You can't get complacent about it. You can't think, oh, it's just another flight like that. I've done that before. I'm going to have plenty of mental capacity to deal with something that goes wrong. But then you get complacent and something goes wrong that you don't notice. So that's the danger of that part of the practice. Yeah, there's other things as well. What about the practice for the engine failure that might happen on the route? How often did you last go and do one of those with an instructor? And that's really where that the latest thing from the dual flight that we have to do as part of the SEP revalidation comes into its fore as well. So it doesn't have to be once every 2 years. You can do it more often than that, with an instructor if you want to. Just once every 2 years to do a PFL probably isn't going to save you bacon if it happens for real. So so just think about those things too.
And capacity then, Phil. So I think we've talked about this lots and lots. When you're display flying compared to when you're GA flying, do you think in GA flying you need to have a lot more capacity available, or can you get away with turning up to the airfield late from a business meeting, sort of rushing into it and things, or?
No, so I think we always have to do in GA flying just as much as in display flying, or indeed any other kind of flying. You want to have your spare mental capacity, as large as it possibly can be, to be working in that kind of analogy, that the bucket and how full it is, to be working with that bucket nice and sort of medium to sort of low full, so you've got plenty of space. Should stuff go wrong, plenty can go wrong. On a PPL NavX, there's all manner of things that can catch you out. And I think one of the ways, as we talk about the practice bit, and Nigel touched on it, practicing those contingencies. We talk about that a lot in the airline world. On every brief, there we go, contingencies. Practice those contingencies is what frees up what helps to free up as much capacity as possible for when they happen. I won't steal the thunder of the next slide.
Do you ever use simulators in display flying as well? I mean, and I'll be interested to your views. Is practicing contingencies in simulators or on flight sims, is that something useful for GA pilots, do you think, or is that more likely to confuse them? I don't know if any of you have ever come across that.
Yeah, I mean, so in the Hawk display, we use the simulator all the time, especially for engine failure working out exactly how can you get up and over the crowd to open areas behind them potentially, or does the aircraft not have enough energy in that state? We don't have that luxury, of course, in now, but I think the type of simulation that you're talking about, Microsoft Flight Sim, that kind of stuff. Hey, why not? Whatever helps your mind kind of cognitively go through the process of a lowering cloud base on a NavX, or an engine failure and an awkward part of being in the circuit when you're joining the airfield that you're planning to go to. Any of those things that you can practice in any kind of simulation, or just chair flying your way through it. I think it's all for the better.
Great, yeah. I know in one of my clubs we've used simulators quite extensively in the navigation phase as well, looking at en route diversions and things like that, with rough running engines and where to go and things like that. More of which will be coming up in a future workshop. Stay tuned for that. We're going to be talking with the CA about partial engine failures, so I don't want to eat those sandwiches now, but look out for that in the future. And Nigel, we talked about those terminate and stop calls earlier in the thing. So nobody's going to tell you to terminate or stop on your GA flight, are they?
No, they're not. But equally, even in a display, the pilots, the display pilot, and we can elect to stop our own display. All right. So we just tell them we're terminating, and that's it. for whatever reason that we might see fit. Maybe the oil temperature's gone up a little bit too high, still within limits, but it's not what it usually is. Okay, and all those little tiny things like that, if not so much with the military flying, as Phil mentioned, they're quite prescriptive about the maneuvers that we can do. But if I'm at a seaside show, for example, we often don't have a horizon. So I might elect not to do a couple of maneuvers which is in my display, because that would require me to have a half decent horizon to know which way up I am. Okay, so I might then elect to actually, I'm not going to do that maneuver. I'm going to skip that and move on to the next one. So there's lots of things that we can do, just because my favorite saying in aviation, just because you can doesn't mean you should. I know, and weather is another thing as well. So if the weather's coming in or you can't get to your display, then fine, okay, let's just make an early decision, bite the bullet, and go home and have a cup of tea, and then just ring up the fly and display director or the organizer and say, I'm really sorry, couldn't get to you because of the weather. And those guys, they are exceptionally happy that you will have done that. Okay, and they are fully understanding about it too. And the same thing happens with GA. You don't have to get to your destination. We're not a commercial pilot with 300 people behind us waiting to go on a holiday. All right, we can always do this flight another day and another time.
Very true. And finally, I'll mention this, we've talked about being your brother's keeper or your sister's keeper, however you want to terminology it, in terms of expression. But yeah, it's looking out for each other, but also this debrief, being self-critical. You don't have to have it formalized. You don't have to do it with other people. After every GA flight, just driving home or having a coffee in the club room after, you can think to yourself, what went well, what didn't go well, what could I do better next time? And I do it as an examiner and instructor. I'm driving home thinking, what, that wasn't brilliant. I learned a lesson just the other day doing a test. I got into the habit. The guidance is often take a spare headset on tests. I've got kind of a bit lax, and because headsets, they're all really reliable and great these days, aren't they? There's no problem. We never have broken headsets these days. Well, you know what? On a test the other day, the candidate had a broken headset and it didn't work. As it happened, we had to swap over the jacks and put them in a rear jack plug, and I had to do some of the RT to get us back home because the jack plug came loose and failed. But it just took to me as going, well, actually, it could have been the headset itself that was faulty, and that candidate would have lost the test because of that. So, the guidance is there. Take a spare headset on tests. It's there for a reason, So I driving home, I thought, what, I'm going to make sure for my subsequent tests, I stick and adhere to that guidance. So yeah, there's always something to learn, no matter how well experienced you are at these things. We've covered questions as we've gone, and we also had some emailed in. It's great to see in the chat box as well this evening some esteemed colleagues as well. Been marking Nigel's and Phil's homework, I'm sure. They will get in touch with them as well. And I've also got to say good luck to, I think it's Peter, that is going to fly the Spitfire from Norwich. So Peter, our fingers crossed for your good weather on that, and what I'm sure will be once in a lifetime experience. So have a great time with that. But thank you for joining us this evening. We hope you've learned something and found it some use. Those are the contact details. Those are the social links there as well. You will get a survey that will pop up in your window. Please take the time to fill this in. We don't trace back who said what, but it helps us to frame these websites and our webinars for future events, and we get to know themes, we get to know what's interesting people, and on that basis, the next webinar is keeping one step ahead of your AME, your aeromedical examiner. That was something people have been asking lots for us to be able to get an AME. We think that one's going to be really popular. So look out for that, sign up for that, and it'd be great to see you at that. But sadly, we've run out of time for this evening. All remains big thank you to Nigel and Phil. Great support. It's not an area I'm familiar with personally at all, although I do train and fly aerobatics, the whole displaying flying is something totally alien to me. So I've certainly learned something myself as well doing this. And also Talifa in the background has been keeping the tech running and helping some of you out that struggle to get in and out. I know she's been helping everybody with that as well. All that remains me to say is thank you, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you at the next webinar. Or if you see some of us around airfields, please do come up and have a chat. It's always great to engage with you and chat out and about as well. Thank you, everybody, and take care. Have a good evening.